Not a 5.
All right, this is Josh. What we got here is a 96 Silverado with 350 vortec,
430 over.
430 over, and of course, as you can see, no fuel injections, all carb, high-rise intake with a 4L60 transmission. I see a lot of these videos on this thing, these trucks, and a lot of guys are saying that you have to buy the $500 shift box that goes on these. That's incorrect, because we have figured out how to wire the 4L60, even though we're not running any of the electronics from the engine, the fuel injectors, and of course we can run the HEI distributor, XL distributor, XL wires.
Not the original timing cover.
Right, we would remove the original timing cover with the crank sensor. Now there's no crank sensor in the timing cover, but you have to wire that in also, that plug. And I'm going to tell you how to do all this, because there's really, we've looked on YouTube and everywhere, there's not a lot of information. A lot of guys that have these 96 up trucks that cannot get these things to shift, that are saying you have to buy this box, they're incorrect, because this thing shifts perfect. Shifts absolutely perfect.
You have to have the TP.
But we pulled the cam out, put a 270 comp cam in it.
270 Magnum.
270 Magnum. High-rise intake, of course, new intake gaskets, all that, etc. Change the springs on it. 670 Holley Street Avenger. And it does have the TPS kit. You have to have the TPS. There's two things you have to get this thing to shift. You have to have the TPS kit, which means you need a Holley card, because Holley does make this kit
with a bracket.
With the bracket that bolts onto the choke. Now you have to pull the choke assembly out in order to get all this bolted up. It's a pretty straight instruction manual on how to get it to run. But anyway, what you have to do on these trucks to get this thing to shift, and we had some trouble with it. We had to figure it out. We went in here blind. But you have to have a signal. Let me backtrack a little bit and start out. All right, now over here usually is where you have, on your regular vortec motor, you would have your coil setting. Now you need to tape this plug up and make sure that you can find it, because you're going to use 2 wires off this plug that goes to the existing coil. And what you'd have to do, which of course you can't see the wires now, we've got them all tucked in nice and neat. But take the coil wire, you have the white wire. The white wire will run to the tack side of your HEI.
Red wire to the HEI,
and the red wire
to the power battery side
will be to the battery side of the distributor. And if you're not sure which one the red wire is, or which one's getting 12 volt to your ignition, of course, any of you Chevrolet guys know that you have to have 12 volt ignition to fire your coil and your HEI. But anyway, you run the hot wire from this coil plug into the HEI side, and you take the RPM and you run the wire to the white wire. White wire is your RPM gauge. Now when you wire these up, your tack will work inside the truck. There's no pulling the dash out, no doing anything like that. It works fine. Now, of course, when you pull this original vortec intake off, you have all these extra wires hanging everywhere. You have to have your grounds hooked up. Now, you can tuck the wires back behind the firewall like we did to hide them, but you have to have your grounds on there. You know, you have your ground down here by your crank sensor. It has to be plugged up. It has to be grounded. You've got another additional ground somewhere back in here, which we tied into the ground bolt in the back of the head that y'all are familiar with. And there's another ground on the other side of the motor. And all these grounds have to be hooked up, because if you do not hook these grounds up, your whole harness is not going to work, and you're going to have problems with your... Go ahead and turn the key on and turn the signals on. We can make sure these guys know that the turn signals and everything's working perfect. Let's go ahead and crank it up for a second. Turn your left turn signal on. Right turn signal. Alright. Anyway, go ahead and cut it back off so they can hear me talking, but I think it sounds great with a cam. Anyway, as far as the you know, the extra wire and the tack, that white wire over there, like I was talking about before on the coil, if you run it directly into your tack side on your thing, your gauge, your RPM gauge in there works perfect. And when you ground all the harness wires, all your gauges inside, your dash lights work, the blinkers work, brake lights work. You have absolutely no problems. All right, now once you do that, of course, you know when you run in your when you're going to a carb, you need the regulator. We bought the Holley regulator. It's more expensive with the Marshall gauge. And you have your 60 coming in from your tank. Then you have your return line to dump the fuel. Then, of course, the gas line that runs in the carburetor. And I think we're running a little less than 9 PSI is what this carb likes. But anyway, it's fully adjustable. But you need this return line on here, because if you run the electric fuel pumps without the return line, what you're going to do is all that extra pressure in your tank, you're going to end up burning your electric fuel pump up. You don't want that. But anyway, okay, since we went through all this, you got your RPM inside working, you got your power to your coil, you got it timed, it's starting, it's running fine, fuel pump's running, you got, and some guys have said that you have to bypass the relay, which I'll show you right here. Let me pop this off. Pop that cover off, just show them that fuel pump relay still in there. Some people claim that you had to have, of course, this right here is your fuel pump relay. A lot of guys say, well, you have to bypass this relay or run the fuel pump where it runs all the time. That's incorrect, because we've had zero problems with this, and we can crank it up, and we're constantly getting 9 PSI to the carb. Absolutely no issues whatsoever, so don't worry about that. But if you do run into that, you know what to do. Alright, as far as it shifting, we had all this wired up, couldn't figure out how to get it to shift. Well, we don't have the original timing cover on it, which of course you can't hardly see it. You can see a little bit of the chrome down there. He wanted a fancy timing cover. We put the timing cover on, drove the truck, wouldn't shift. And we got to do some research, and we figured out that the crank position sensor plug, you have to have an RPM signal. Well, let me go ahead and tell you right now that the way the ECM works and the power control module that runs the transmission works, it gets its RPM signal from this crank sensor. Now, the crank sensor's not on this thing, like I said before, but the plug for it is back there. Now, all you have to do is get a test light. Figure out, you got 3 wires going to your crank sensor down there on your timing cover. You've got a 12 volt hot, which you ought to be able to tell by a test light which one's 12 volt hot. Well, the other side, you've got a ground in the center, and the other wire is going to send your crank sensor data to the PCM and to the computer. It's not a white wire.
Not a white wire?
No. Anyway, you'll have one side will be hot, and the other side will be the crank sensor. Now, what we did is all you have to do is just tap an extra wire into the RPM side of your distributor. Now, running that wire, now we'll go back to this plug, this crank sensor plug I was talking about over here. Now, the other side of this crank sensor wire that goes to the computer, all you have to do is just tie your RPM gauge, not gauge, but your RPM wire coming straight out of the distributor into that plug that goes to the computer from the crank sensor. Now, when you do that, the computer is going to pick up your RPM, and your PCM is going to pick up your RPM from that. Now, these things will not shift if you do not have that hooked up. So once you have an RPM signal going to where that crank sensor is, and your TPS is hooked up, which of course we extended the wires and hid the harness back there, but these are the original throttle position sensor wires. Tie this in with this kit, and once this TPS is hooked up and your crank sensor is plugged up, it will shift. It will shift perfect. Now, only modifications you'd have to do was go in here and, of course, loosen these bolts up on this one. This is the Holley kit that you buy. Yours may be different depending on your carburetor, or if you make a homemade rig, whatever. As long as it, your throttle bracket turns your TPS, that'll regulate where your shift points are. Now, you can loosen these bolts up and adjust this left and right to fix your shift points a little bit, which ours is running pretty good right now. But you do not. But like I said, if you have a Vortec, a late model Vortec truck, an older model Vortec, it does not matter. Leave your computer where it's at. Hide your wiring harnesses, ground all your wires, run an RPM signal to where the crank sensor was at, and hook your TPS in, and it shifts perfect. All 3 gears. But this is just a little information to help you guys out who are having trouble with this, with this particular type. One thing I wanted to add, I've read a few forums that says that, this vortec, on the vortec you have a distributor plug that runs into the back side of the distributor, and of course, you had your cam sensor wire where you adjust your cam sensor to get your timing right. A lot of people told me that you have to wire this up to the distributor. That's incorrect. Our wire, if I can find it, it's still sitting down there. Of course, you can't see it, but anyway, that distributor plug wire is not even plugged up to nothing. It's just sitting there. So that wire does not affect the 4L60 at all. Now, the same thing would work with the 4L80 depending on what you got. But you just ignore, on 96 up, on these vortex, ignore the distributor wires altogether. Like I said, let me recap. White wire and the power wire off your resisting coil will go to the distributor. Your crankshaft position sensor wire, make sure you have an RPM signal from the HEI running to the feed wire going to the computer, and hook your TPS up and it will shift. But anyway, I just wanted to add that in there because we have searched the internet over and over trying to figure out how to do this. And I wanted to add a video that would explain how to do it for all you guys out there that want to do this type of mod or, whatever else. But I can tell you right now, this is the best thing this motor has had done. Of course, when you bypass the computer, you're bypassing all the regulated diagnostics on there, and you don't have no drawbacks. The motor won't cut off, won't shut off, etc. And of course, the HEI fires so much hotter than a standard ignition, but the truck runs absolutely perfect, and it's got twice the power it did before. If I could go back and do it again, I would do another one. But the best thing about the carb motors, is they're simple to work on. You've got your 12 volt to your HEI, get your air fuel, your air breather and your carburetor, and that's it. And everything else other than just the transmission, a couple transmission wires, that's it. But for the 4L60 to shift, all the 4L60 needs is a TPS and an RPM signal from the crank sensor that runs to the PCM. That's it. Hook your grounds up and you're good to go. But I just wanted to add that video to help you guys out. Thanks a lot.